It can be argued that modern horror films don't delve into the psyche and leave an impression of fear lasting long after the end credits, instead relying on loud noises and jump scares which the viewer instantly laughs off. In my opinion, true horror shouldn't be laughed at or made for pure entertainment. But how is this possible when we are aware that what we are watching on the screen is all fantasy?
Roll video.
This is where the uncanny steps in, and today we'll see how Stanley Kubrick uses this concept to its fullest. In his 1919 essay, Das Unheimlich, Sigmund Freud defines two key German words, unheimlich and heimlich. Heimlich translates as canny or homey, and unheimlich translates as uncanny or unhomey. Freud's thesis is that the uncanny is a revelation of what is private and concealed, of what is hidden. Hidden not only from others, but also from the self, i.e., the repressed. For Freud, uncanny reveals something in the home that is supposed to be a secret. Now, you might be asking what any of this has to do with The Shining. As we know, fantasy is different from reality, as it does not require any sort of reality testing. In other words, if the uncanny events are presented as normal in a story, then the viewer will adjust their expectations to this so-called normal state of fictional reality. And so Freud concluded that for this reason the viewer might not experience the uncanny in a fictional universe. But Kubrick creates the uncanny effect by making a pretense to realism, because we as a viewer believe that the real conditions of life being narrated. Thus, there is a discrepancy between reality and fantastic events in The Shining when we are removed from our initial ordinary and comfortable associations with the images of the Overlook Hotel. Let's take a look at one of the most notable aspects of the cinematography in The Shining. Kubrick's use of the one-point perspective, which is when the lines in the camera shot are parallel with the viewer's perspective and converge in a vanishing point in the center of the frame. This technique is perhaps most recognizable in the scene where Danny rides his tricycle through the hallways in the hotel. In this scene, we notice that the movement of the lines runs parallel to the walls, ceiling, and carpet, bringing our line of sight to the center of the frame. Kubrick's Steadicam allows the take to continue undisturbed, and the effect of this actually makes the scene appear longer than it actually is, as well as the physical distance traveled by Danny. You might not always be aware of it, but when we watch movies, our eyes are more often familiar with 0, 2, or 3 perspective points rather than 1. Thus, Kubrick's filming techniques creates an uncanny vantage, because it conflates fantasy and reality through an illusion of space and time in the midst of the familiar settings of the hotel. And Kubrick uses this filming technique throughout the entire film. If we recall the opening credits, the camera flies over a body of water and then moves through the Rocky Mountains while only focusing on Jack Torrance as he is driving down the road. Upon Jack's arrival at the Overlook Hotel for his interview to become the winter caretaker there, is still an abundance of human activity. The pre-Shining form in which we first encounter the Overlook Hotel shows several medium shots of patrons walking in the lobby and carrying their luggage to check out of their rooms. We then see a shot of the twin red elevators that appear to be a very ordinary part of the hotel. The viewer's connection with the camera aligns with the ordinary landscape of the hotel, and it is with the pre-Shining condition that Kubrick introduces the viewing to the hotel that he seems to be promising truth and verisimilitude. But as the employees take their exit from the hotel, the viewer is introduced to a new camera angle, which is shown to break this promise. Upon seeing the ghost twins for the first time, Kubrick closes in on Danny's face, cuts to the twins, and then cuts back to Danny. Instead of freaking out, Danny's face is almost unresponsibly fascinated, and thus Kubrick is conflating the viewer's discrepancy between the world of reality and fantasy. And then, if we recall Danny's tricycle scene in the hallway, the barrier between the third-person and first-person perspective slowly fades away as the camera moves forward. The effect of this makes the viewer feel as if they are walking down the hallways, which is Kubrick's way of establishing an element of homeliness within the hotel. Kubrick cuts to a close-up of Danny's face. As if to test whether or not the twins are really there, Danny quickly pulls his hands over his face. He then slowly pulls his fingers away from his face, right before the camera cuts back to the opposing end of the hallway, and the twins no longer occupy. Kubrick is showing us the uncanny in a fine cinematic demonstration by portraying ordinary surroundings that, for some unknown reason, become terrifyingly dark. Kubrick is preventing the viewer from adjusting their sensibility to the fictional world, because the Overlook Hotel is introduced in the pretense of realism. The uncanny is further present in the Lloyd scene as an upset Jack walks up to the bar and peers over the counter. Sitting at the bar, he covers his face and begins to speak directly to the camera. The camera then cuts to the other side of the bar to reveal Lloyd. Jack asks Lloyd to pour him a drink, and Lloyd fulfills his duty as a bartender, even speaking professionally and calling him Mr. Torrance, as if he is a guest at the Overlook Hotel. What is of importance in this scene is Kubrick's use of the camera. Because Jack breaks the fourth wall and looks directly into the camera before we are certain of Lloyd's presence behind the bar, the barrier between reality and fantasy is further conflated. There is no safe or secure place from which the viewer can experience Jack's delusions. The effect of this puts the viewer in just as much of a vulnerable position that the characters in the film are shown to be. It is Kubrick's incorporation of the viewer through his cinematography that establishes the presence of the uncanny, and thus becomes the film's true source of horror. But perhaps the most revealing notion of the uncanny in the film is the bloody elevator scene. The red elevator doors appear twice in the film and foreshadow the horrifying psychotic state that overcomes Jack. The spookiness is enhanced even more by the fact that they are not crucial to the plot, and Kubrick makes no attempt to explain their supernatural elements. This leaves the viewer in a sticky situation, as they are unable to differentiate between reality and fantasy, and it is for this very reason that the elevator doors suggest an unconscious psychological dimension, as Freud states that a particularly favourable condition for awakening uncanny sensations is created when there is intellectual uncertainty whether an object is alive or not, and when an inanimate object becomes too much like an animate one. The Shining, then, is a film that demonstrates the power of Kubrick's stylistic choices to follow the uncanny to arise and create an environment of psychological horror. Thus, through his use of the uncanny, Kubrick breaks traditional genre conventions by not solely relying upon Jack to be the primary source of horror, but rather the fear of inanimate objects becoming too much like animate ones.